Have you ever had this happen while you're drawing? You sketch out a character, everything's looking great, and then you step back and it's like, oh my god, what have I done? The proportions are wrong, the face looks wonky, and everything really is just not coming together. Today, we're going to fix that, and I'm going to help you using Clip Studio Paint's 3D model tool. Clip Studio features a variety of 3D tools to help you pose your characters and get exact proportions without constantly making changes to your sketch. And in today's tutorial, I'm going to teach you exactly how to use those tools to make drawings just like this. Keep in mind that I'm using the iPad version of Clip Studio for this video, so the display is going to be a bit different than what you might see, and I'm using a custom workspace, so even if you're in the iPad, it's going to look a bit different. Either way though, the functionality works exactly the same, and if you're using a PC, Mac, or any other version, you should be able to follow along to some degree, though I'll make the icons as clear as I can so you know what's happening. If you like this video and you want to see more, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. It's a really big help to me, and it's a free way for you to support me in making these tutorials. All right, with all that out of the way, let's get started with the video. Okay, let's not waste any time. We're gonna jump right into it. So in Clip Studio Paint, you're usually able to find this toolbar. It might be on the right side for you, it might be on the left, of folders or folder looking icons where you can find things like the 3D tools that we're going to use in this video. There's a lot to work with here, but we're going to stick to the human models for today's video. So click on this folder right here that seems to have a 3D model icon on it, and you should be able to find a multitude of 3D items. Now, in my iPad version here, I have a 3D dropdown. It's the same on PC. You should have plenty of dropdowns like this. You're looking for the one that has 3D on it. Now, the settings that we're going to use today are mostly from head or body type, or you can also find some in the pose icons here. So for example, when I scroll through here, you can see a bunch of different preset poses that I can download from the Clip Studio Assets store. And there's also a bunch of extra poses that you can find on other websites that you can import into Clip Studio. There's a couple that have characters that you can download from the asset store. The iPad has less functionality than the PC right off the bat, but you can download that content from the asset store. So don't worry, if you don't have anything downloaded right now, just look around, explore, see if you can find 3D models that you want to use. For today, all I'm really focusing on is the bare bones male and female models, which are pre-downloaded into Clip Studio. And we're going to try out some different poses, and we'll manipulate how they look, their body structures, their posing, and also with the head models, we'll do the exact same thing with making the eyes bigger, noses smaller, fitting them into more of that anime manga style that we really like to use. So what we're going to do is start by throwing our head model into the scene. So I'm going to use the very basic head that we have here, and you'll see it just fits onto the screen right here. It goes straight to the middle for me, and we have lots of different icons that we're working with here today. So if you've ever used a 3D modeling software like Blender or Maya, Cinema 4D, those things, the things I'm about to cover are going to be probably some beginner knowledge for you, but I do recommend you stick around for a bit of a refresher if you're not an expert in this subject. And some of the Clip Studio icons might be a bit different than what you're used to. So let's start with a few of what these top icons do. So if we start with this first icon right here, which you can see is highlighting in yellow for me right now, if I move it, it turns the head in this 360 format. It's a big rotation tool. You can rotate it on any axis, and it rotates it with the ground plane. Now this is an important factor here. If I rotate, you can see the ground plane, which is that grid on the bottom, is moving with the head. So if I rotate up here, the ground plane is now below it. These tools that are hollow, which you can now see are being highlighted right now. So there's solid blue ones, and there's ones that seem to be more transparent with a white cube in them. This one moves it without moving the grid. So that's an important fact we want to keep in mind here. So this is the rotation tool, tool number one. Now this second tool right here is sort of a translation tool. It moves the head in the scene. It moves it with the ground plane with this version right here. This third tool right here is changing our scale, and it's changing it again with the grid. So keep in mind, these first three icons are always changing with the grid, so the grid will go with it. If you have multiple items in a scene, which you can do, you can have multiple items on this layer, it will change both items because it's moving the ground plane as well. Now let's move on to these hollow icons. This first one, again, it's just moving it. It's translating it in space, and it's hollow, which means that it's moving it separate from the ground plane. So you can see, even if I rotate around here, by the way, the auto select tool, if I just press anywhere on screen, I'm not actually pressing the icon, I'm pressing like just to the right of the head. It will start with whatever that first tool is. So I like to keep it on this rotate tool, that's the default, but you can change that up if you want to, I believe. So yeah, this is a translation tool. Now we have some rotation with that second tool. This is rotating it just on the horizontal axis, and it's not following that grid horizontal axis necessarily. It's mostly following where our camera is. Right, so you can see my camera is now above the grid, but I'm rotating it sideways using this tool, and it's going forwards and backwards in the sense of where the head is looking. I moved the camera around a little bit, and now it's rotating again with my camera on a horizontal axis. Same if I want to move it vertically, I just go up and down. You can see it turn to a red icon there. That's because it's using that particular axis, okay? Now moving on to this next tool, again, we're getting some rotation. This one is just the plane that's missing of these two. So this one's moving it in sort of a horizontal or vertical axis. This one's moving it in a circular plane that's, in a sense, it's a 2D circle that it's spinning it around on. Now, I get that this can be confusing, but just keep in mind that mainly what tools you're going to be using are this transformation tool, this rotation tool right here, and then some of the scale options, really. You can use some of these rotations, just play around with it for a bit if you're not used to how these tools work. It's more of a muscle memory thing. You'll get how you can move these around in space. Now we have this horizontal rotation tool, which really almost works the same as this one. The difference with this is it's still following the ground plane. And then the last one here is like a depth tool. Not really one that I use very often, but if your scale is not really looking correct, this is a great way to just fix up that scale. And it feels like it moves it closer to the camera, which is a great tool to have. Now this right here is the snapping tool. So if I want to snap it relative to another 3D model, I can. There's no 3D models in the scene right now, so we don't have to worry about that. Okay, now we're going to take a look at some of these bottom icons on this gray bar right here. The first one right here is just selecting the previous 3D object. So again, I'm not really showing this because we only have one object in the scene, but the idea is that if you had multiple objects and you'd used one before and then you're using one now, actually, you know what? Let's make it very clear. Let's add in a second model right here. I'm going to throw in a second head. It exists on the same layer. So say I wanted to move it in its own space. I'm now using the white tools. If I move with the ground plane, you can see both of them move. Okay, that's a very clear demonstration right there that you can use. So let's move it back in space a little bit, right? Get them sort of at the same size. Now you'll see if I press the back arrow, it moves to the next model. If I press the forward arrow, it moves to that first or that second model again. That's what the arrow tools are for. It's just moving between 3D objects that you have in your scene. I want to get rid of this one now because I really don't need it here. Okay, let's select our head again. And we're going to look at the wrench tool. This is a very complicated subtool menu, same as if you were editing your pencils, your erasers, things like that. Let's go through some of these a bit later. For now, all you need to know is that this is where a lot of your options come from for lighting, for facial features, things like that. And this will be the same for your head or for your body models. Next, we have this camera looking icon, which is the specify camera angle from preset. This gives you a lot of preset options that Clip Studio has loaded in. So for example, if I want the head to face sort of to the left, I can do that. Now, keep in mind that this is only going to work relative to where the head sort of already is, right? And where the ground plane is. So if I wanted to reset this head to default, which I believe these buttons reset it. There we go. We've set our model back to sort of a relative spot on the ground plane. So it's stuck to the ground now. We can move it a little bit this way so we have it facing ourselves. There we go. That's perfect. Now, if I press on this camera icon, I want to set it to face, say, a little bit to the left. Perfect. Now I've got a 3/4 view. Let's say I want it to look a little bit further left. I can do that. Now this is a head model. This would move for head and body models if you wanted it to. We can go from above, as you can see here. Now we're looking at it slightly down. These preset models are really, really useful if you want some basic posing before you do your own customized posing, right? Now moving on to our next, we have center object, which just moves it to the center of the frame. We have our place model on ground level, which is just going to place it back on that grid. So you can see now we're back stuck to the grid. The bottom of that model is now sticking to the grid plane. Next, we're looking at the reset model scale. So if I wanted to reset the scale of the model, let's say I wanted to make the model really, really big on the Y plane. So I'm going to extend it really, really long like that. Now it's outscaled. It looks really wonky. We want to fix that. Set it back to normal. That's all it does, is it sets it back to normal. Now, keep in mind that if you're using this depth perception sort of tool where it pushes it back, that's not changing the scale. It's actually just pushing it back in space. The model is exactly the same size. So if we press this reset model scale, it doesn't do anything. Nothing happens. Now, moving on, if we move this back to its original position, we have reset model rotation. All I have to do is move it around a little bit. If I reset it, it goes back to straight on. I can also do this with the grid plane, and you'll see nothing happens because it's setting it back relative to that grid plane. So I can only use these rotation tools that sort of move it separate from the grid. And if I press that button, it resets perfectly to face straight, depending on where I am, right? If I'm over here and I rotate it a bit this way and then this way, it should actually start facing to the right. Okay, it's not going to face straight towards my camera right now. It should face in, sorry, I wanted to point. I want it to face in this direction right here. So let's see if that happens, okay? Go back to our model. Let's get to our object tool. Keep in mind this object tool right here in the top left, the operation, allows us to actually access all of these tools. So if you're not seeing it, this is why. You want to be on this operation tool. Reset our rotation. You can see he's actually facing to the right now, which is perfect. That's exactly what we expected. And our last option right here is the save the 3D head model to the material palette. What does this mean? Well, let's say we customized our head, which we're going to do in a second. We can now save it as a custom model. So say you want a character that you want to look a certain way, you can save it to look that way. So now you don't have to worry about changing the nose every single time you load up this character that you want to draw. So we'll do that later. And what I want to go over now is the scaling and rotation and transformation tools that are actually direct access from the head model. So you can see what I mean by that is all of these green and blue and red icons with this gray scale tool right here. It works exactly the same as these tools right here. It's going to scale it separate from the grid. It's going to rotate it separate from the grid, but it doesn't move it other than with the transformation tool, right? So it works very similarly to the tools that we've already used. It's just an easy access format. You'll see that a lot in 3D modeling programs as well, like Blender. They have things like this where you can just scale out using using direct icons that are not as confusing as this whole bar of tools, right? You know, these boxes are scale. They scale based on an axis. They're not random. And the axes are color-coded. So for example, I rotate it out here, gives us a better view. This green axis is the y-axis. I like to think of this red axis as the x-axis and this blue axis as the z-axis. If you ever played Minecraft, it works basically the same way. You've got your two horizontal axes and you got your vertical axis, okay? Going back to center here, the x-axis and every other axis, but let's focus on the x right now, has a scale tool in the form of this cube, and it works from the other side as well. It has a translation tool, which just moves it along the x-axis. So you can see if I move over here, it's moving in a very straight line. Okay, it follows that grid almost. Or not almost, it does follow that grid. Now, the last thing we can do with our x-axis is rotate it. And this might be a little confusing. Why is it rotating in what seems to be a different direction from these cubes and these arrows? Well, it is rotating, but on the x-axis. What we'll see is that if we think of this set of red arrows and these cubes as the x-axis line, so moving straight through the object, we got a little x-axis line. It's rotating around that line. That's the center of the x-axis for it right there. Same with all the other ones. The y-axis, you can see it goes vertically like this. The y-axis rotation tool is rotating around in the vertical plane. Okay? It's a little bit complicated at first, but I think you guys can get the hang of it with a little bit of practice. So work around with these, see what works, see what doesn't, experiment. That's the really big lesson I'm trying to teach here, is that you want to experiment with these tools so you can learn what to do, when to do it, and what feels good for your art style, what you like to do with your models. Okay, now that we have our object centered and we have it ready to go, we're going to look at some customization options. So these first three menus, generally, I would just ignore them. I don't think they're important for the purposes of this video specifically. The 3D models that we're looking for, we're just looking for a baseline model that we can use to draw on. We're not looking to actually create a 3D character or anything like that, and most of these are for that type of purpose. Our transformation section is just giving us a more numbers access to what's going on with the position and the size and the rotation of our objects. You can see all of these are a fixed ratio for our transformation in scale, which means that if we change this x-axis, all of them are going to change to the exact same size, right? So let's set that back to normal, right? We want it at 100. Same with the position. This is moving it along the x-axis, the y-axis, the z-axis, right? So if you're having trouble with placing your object and the tools don't seem to be working for you, try out this menu, see if it works. Next is our camera. We don't need to get, again, we don't need to worry too much about this. This is really just saying like, oh, do we want to change up the camera position and the perspective and things like that? So for example, if I change our perspective, you can see it gets really, really wonky. That's because a lot of perspective starts to create this foreshortening effect. So if you want your character to have like a sword that points towards the camera, you would use perspective. That's a really, really useful tool. For our purposes today, we don't need that. Maybe you'll be seeing one in the thumbnail. Depends how lazy I'm feeling today. Let's set that back to normal. And then roll. It's just rolling our character in space here. We don't really need that to be doing anything. Camera position. You can see that this is moving it sort of really far towards the x-axis. This is going to move it straight up. And this is going to move it really far away from the front. Focal point position. To be honest, I have no idea what this one does. But I really don't think it's that important. You can just ignore that. Right? All the rest of the things in here, not as important. I would say play around with perspective a little bit if you want to try it. But again, not a big deal. Not important. Lens settings, again, this is something that's more for like if you want the perfect angle with your 3D characters. All it's really doing is changing up how your lens looks. So if you're not good with how cameras work, I'm not really good with how cameras work, I don't think this is that important unless you're looking for a very, very fancy angle. Right? What we really want to get to are these head model and facial features right here. Okay, head model is just some baseline models that you can use. You can also register material models. So for example, if I wanted to save this head that I have right now, I can do that. And I can register it in this material. That's what this last thing does. It's the exact same thing. That's why they have the same icon. If I want to use any of these preset head models, all I do is click on it, set it up to its highest point, and it sets it perfectly to that model. I can also mix and match. So say I want like 50, 40% of this more female looking model, and then I want this more anime soft style. I add it up. Maybe I want it to look a little more masculine. I throw in some of this feature. We sort of ended back where we started, but you get the idea, right? You can mix and match these, although don't overdo it because there's no point to it. You want to have your character looking specific to the type of character they're going to be. If I want a manly anime character, I'm going to have sharp features. I'm going to have a broad jawline, things like that. If I want a more feminine character, I might want to soften the jawline. I might want to use this soft anime feature. I might want to use these ones with bigger lips, things like that, right? It's all up to your art style and how you're interpreting these, but generally think of these as a possible baseline, but not the rule, right? You can always mix and match with the facial features option. So let's say I wanted to make this character look a little bit more anime style. Right now, they're close, but I would consider this more of like a manhwa style, right? Very sharp, but still somewhat rounded features. I think we can make this look more traditionally anime. So we need sharper features. How would we do that? First of all, let's work on our neck here. We need it to be a little bit thinner for a female character. Now we're gonna go to our chin. I wanna see the position of the mouth about there. The mouth should be about 2/3 up towards the nose from the chin. The offset of the mouth is not important because it's really gonna shift it in terms of its central position on the face. That's gonna be weird unless you're doing like a 3/4 view or things like that. Don't worry about that stuff unless you're really experimenting, you're trying to get that. Don't worry about it. It's not gonna be helpful for you right now. Depth is going to change how deep the mouth is into the face. So you can see from the front, you can't see much, but it's really pushing it in and out. We don't need much on that. I would keep it at 0. In terms of width of the mouth, I think an anime character would have a bit less of a width, a bit more of a fullness to their lips. And then tilt-wise, we don't really need any tilt. Now, move on to the nose. Let's sharpen that nose a little bit. Right? Let's give it a bit more height. There we go. Nose tip tilt is really important for anime characters. It doesn't have to be that high though. The nose bridge doesn't have to be that deep. Moving on to the eyes, let's give them a bit lower of a height. Don't need to rotate them out actually. Size, a little bit wider, a little bit taller. Now we're getting to that look. A little bit of a slant. Nah, I don't think we need a bit of a slant. And then the depth. Well, that's interesting looking. The depth can just go 0. I feel like we don't need the depth. Moving on, our brows. I think our brows look good. Honestly, I think I'm good with what we've got here. We've sharpened it up. From the front, it looks a little bit wonky, but from the 3/4 view, I kind of like it, you know? Let's actually fix up that mouth because I think the width is too small. There we go. I like that. I like that. Perfect. Okay. All the rest of these features, again, not as important. Outline width just creates an outline. So if you want to have like a really thick line that you can put around your character, you can do that. If you want to change the opacity of those outlines, you can. If you want to change the color, you can. So let's leave that low. I don't really like those. Shadows allows you to cast a shadow on the ground. You can see that's based on where the light source is. We can also take off the light source. It changes it to a very flat looking image. We don't really want that. Light source. Now, this menu is a bit confusing. If you want to change where the light source is coming from, you actually move this sphere object. So I'm pressing on the sphere and I'm moving my pen around, and it allows me to change how close it is by pushing up, how far away it is by pulling down. We really can get some good top lighting, some bottom lighting. This is a very important tool. The directional light intensity, if you lower it, it just fades it to a really soft light. This is a very harsh light. Let's keep it sort of in the middle there. Ambient light intensity. So this is changing how much it bounces off of things. All right, this is more of like if you want a fade out looking effect, you can totally do that. I would say don't mess too much with the ambient light effect. Keep it sort of directional. That's a perfect light source right there. Fog just fogs up your image a bit. That's not very useful for our purposes today. Panorama is not important for this model, and preferences is just if you have very specific things you want to do, it's probably in this menu, but again, we don't need to cover this. The main things to focus on are, did you learn about the head model, the facial features, shadows, and light source? Those are going to be your biggest tools. Now let's center this again. We're going to turn this off for now, and I want to look at a body model. So let's go here, and let's pick out a pose. I want to pick out this pose of someone sitting down. Now I'm gonna have to download it quick, and there we go. Now I've got this guy sitting down. The big difference with this is, despite all the tools on the top looking exactly the same, the tools on the bottom are a lot more complicated looking, but most of these are exactly the same as what you've already seen. There's a few differences that we're gonna look at right now. So previous model, next model, exactly the same. The subtool details, exactly the same, other than now you have a posing menu, a hand pose menu, and a manga perspective menu. Everything else other than that and then 3D drawing figure should be exactly the same. The next item registers this as a material, which you can use to register a pose. So say you changed up the pose a little bit. I move this arm up a bit. I move this arm down, stretched out his legs. Now I can save this as a pose by putting in a pose, choosing my location, and pressing OK. By location, it means like, do you want it in a 3D menu? Do you want to go further down and put it into, I don't know why my arrow's not working, put it down into the pose menu and things like that. I don't want to do that right now. Moving on now, we have some options here. Register full body pose as a material. So that's if you want to take the full body and register it as a pose. Then you can do the left hand or the right hand. So let's say I zoomed in and I made this hand, this left hand specifically posed like this. I moved the thumb out a bit. I moved the forefinger out a bit. I can now save that as its own distinct hand pose. And I can render that into a new primitive object, or a new body object if I wanted to. Super useful for detailed hand poses that you want to keep. Say you really like the pose of a hand you use to grip a sword. Now you can save that and use it on the next sword that you drop. Next, this is going to flip it horizontally. Super useful if you've got your character sort of wonky in the wrong side. Flip it over. You've got him facing the right direction now. This item right here is going to revert the model to its default pose. So that's the actual default pose. It's not going to revert it to this. This is going to reset the model scale, same as before. This is going to reset the model rotation. This item right here saves body shape as a material. So this one right here is saving the pose. This one's saving the body shape. So if I made the arms bigger, if I made the legs bigger, if I made the torso smaller, those things are going to get saved as body shape. So you can't save those as a pose. Poses can be used on any 3D model. Shape is going to be what's used on the specific character that you're drawing, the specific size of their shoulders, the specific size of their head, the depth of their facial features, things like that. Next, we have using a 3D pose material. Out of our options here, we have lots of things we can work with. So first, we can use a 3D pose material, which is just any of the saved ones that we have from the asset store. We already saw a bunch of those. Next, we have 3D poses from Pose Maniacs. Now, I'm going to put up some video here. Pose Maniacs is a website that just has a ton of poses. You can connect it to your Clip Studio, and it allows you to use the poses from that website. Super intricate, super detailed, perfect for more complex character poses that aren't already loaded into the asset store. Now you have 3 options for pose scanners and 1 option for a hand scanner. Your pose scanners are like, say for example, you have a photo of someone that you want to copy the pose of. Clip Studio will do its best to take that photo and render it into an image. So say for example, I had a person on this layer that looks like this. I have a head right here. I have them leaning over. Their leg is out here, right? One leg is walking back here, and they've got their arms up in the air. They're doing a big yawn, right? You can copy a pose like that and put it into Clip Studio from the image. Now, it's not perfect, obviously, because that's a 2D image that you're using, but it's pretty good, I would say. If you just want the general thing, and then you can mix and match as you go by changing up your pose options in the actual posing menu, which is over here. Okay. Center our object again, get back here. I don't want that arrow showing. Now, other options are from a photo library, an image, a camera, and you can do a hand scanner camera as well. So say I took a photo of my hand in a certain pose, Clip Studio will try to match it to the camera or to the hand in the image. Or sorry, Clip Studio will try to match it to the hand on your model. And now moving further on, we can check out this joint lock position. So a joint is this orange square that you see right here. It's a little bit hard to see, but that joint is, say, the pelvic joint, which is, I'm not going to say where that is, but yeah. We can use this tool right here, the lock/release, to lock that joint. And what that means is if I want to move the upper half of the body, the legs are staying in the same position right there. If I want to lock the knee, for example, let's say I lock this left knee, I can only move the bottom half of the leg. It's going to change the muscle position because that's how the real body would work. But if I move this left leg, for example, you can see the whole body is shifting, right? So locking joints is really important because if you want to set a pose to be a specific way, you don't want to change other aspects. Like say you have the torso in the perfect position, you want to change where the leg is. You want to lock that hip joint, you want to lock that knee joint, so you're locking all of the sort of outlier variables that are going to get hit when you move this leg. Right? I don't want my whole body flipping upside down every time I move a leg. So that's really important. So let's look at this character customization option in the 3D drawing figure menu. We can choose between our genders here. We can set back to the initial body shape, which I don't want to do. So let's go back. We can change our height. I've set the height pretty tall at 190, 192. It doesn't really matter, just decently tall, right? Head to body ratio is basically going to alter how big that head is compared to the body. When you draw really muscular characters, usually you want your head a bit smaller because it makes the muscles pop, like when people draw the Hulk and things like that. Right now, we're not drawing someone who's super big like the Hulk is, so I don't think it matters that much. We can have a normal sized head. So let's make it look about like that. Now, this option right here, which lets you change the size of each character's feature, or the character's features distinctly, right? So if I want to change the head, the neck, the shoulders, things like that. These are very useful, but right now, let's start with just the big option here, which is the whole body. So what we want to do is make our character's shoulders wider. We want to increase the size of all the musculature, but we don't want to make the thighs too large compared to the body because that V taper is what makes characters look really, really big. So let's experiment a little bit. If I bring it up to the top right here, we see we get really, really wide. So this is more of like a strongman type of build. They're still super muscular, but they aren't really holding that bodybuilder type shape. If we move it to the top left, we can see we get a lot more muscle, right? This is a very buff character. If we move it to the bottom left, we should get a very strange looking ectomorph sort of build, very thin, but also very bulgy because there's no muscle mass on this character anymore, right? And if we move it all the way to the right, we've got more of a fat body build, right? So more of a gut on the character, some thigh build here. Mostly it's focusing on the torso, but you can also increase the size of the legs individually. So moving to the top left is probably our best option, right? This gives us a muscular character. Now keep in mind this is not going to be perfect because this isn't a custom built 3D model necessarily. We're customizing it, sure, but custom 3D models are going to have perfect musculature, whereas this one's being edited inside the software without a lot of attention to exactly how the muscles might look. So you're going to have to customize as best as you can. And then when you're actually drawing your character, you're going to have to take that creative leeway to say, hey, I actually know that the muscle looks this way, and I need to alter that as I go. So for example, when I draw chest muscles, usually over top of this area where it's reaching the shoulder, I don't like to draw the armpit indented like this. You can see sort of how my mouse is going here. I like to have it loop over into the shoulder in this sort of arcing motion, and that's very hard to do with the way the musculature is built right now. right? So we're going to customize this a little bit more, but just keep in mind that you're going to have to work with it as it goes. You know, it's not going to be perfect. So now I've got the buffest build I could possibly have. Let's take a look at some of the features here. So one thing that I'm noticing is that the trap muscles are not the best looking right now. So maybe I can increase the width of the neck a little bit. There we go. Yeah, that's perfect. A little bit of width, maybe a little bit taller on the neck. Let's go to our shoulders here. We're going to increase the width there, right? We want our character to be really, really buff looking. If we move down, we can see that flattens the chest a little bit. I want the chest to push out, but we don't want it to be extreme. So I think that is much more reasonable. Now, if we go to the torso here, one thing that I'm having a problem with is whatever's going on with the lats, right? Because they're coming in front of the body here where I don't want them to be, this rib cage sort of area. So maybe I can get rid of that. Let's see. So this is mostly changing the height and the width of the stomach. It's not really doing much to the lat muscles. I might have to see if I can do anything about that individually. It looks like sort of this, basically what these icons do right here is this one's taking up the full torso, so it's changing the size of the full torso. This one's changing the middle of the torso, so it's not really affecting where the pelvis is, and this one's affecting the pelvis and its height. So for example, this one's going to make the butt look bigger. Let's set that back to more of a default, because I'm not liking entirely how that's turned out. It looks like this is actually part of the shoulder, so let's go back up here, and maybe I can alter this somehow. I'm going to go on pause for a second, figure out how I alter this section specifically. Okay, I figured it out. It was in the shoulder area. I clicked on it just to make sure. Yeah, if I changed its left and right, this does sort of alter it. But it works, I think. I think the arms are just sort of in a weird position now, right? They're too far back. And yeah, I don't know what's going on with this little serratus area, but it's not the end of the world. I feel like if we fix up the arms a little bit, we take some creative leeway, it's going to be fine. Let's look at the arms. I think we can make them a little bit bigger. Right? We're going for like that Captain America build, so I feel like this is better. The triceps are not the most 3D right now, but I don't think that's the end of the world. There we go. There we go. We're getting something here. They really like to go wide with these models. There we go. I like a little bit of length, a little bit of width. I think this is more of the build I'm looking for here, right? We're almost in like that, you know that robot from Thor the Dark World? I feel like this is very similar. Actually, it's not Thor the Dark World, is it? It's the first one. Anyways, let's change our forearm to be a little bit thicker here. I feel like that's perfect. Okay. And yeah, we'll take some creative leeway with these triceps because they're very thin for some reason. I'm not sure how to fix that. Pelvis. Don't need to do too much to that. Also, the reason the head looks really weird is because it's super rounded. It's not because the head size is wrong. It's just because we're using the base model, and the base model's head is just as round as it can get. If you add, and we'll do this later, if you add a more muscular looking head, it'll look perfect. Okay. Legs, I feel like our quads could be a bit thicker. I think our calves could also be a bit thicker. Right? But height-wise, I don't really want to change much. Because right now, we're looking pretty good. Yeah, we're going to take some creative leeway with some of these. You can see the arm shape and stuff. The anatomy's not perfect, but it's close enough that I feel like we're going to get a good result out of this. And the legs are pretty good as well. Especially for shading, I think those legs are going to be perfect. And then finally, let's look at the feet. I feel like, honestly, the feet and hands are pretty much okay. Let's make the hands a little bit bigger. And then maybe we'll shrink down the size of the forearm a little bit. Be a bit shorter, because I feel like it's a little too long. Okay, I think I'm good with this. I think I'm okay with this, the way that this has turned out. Oh, that butt is not nearly large enough. Let's fix that up. There we go. Okay. Now we're getting somewhere. Okay. So now that we've got our model customized, let's put it into a pose. So actually what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Pose Maniacs because I saw some nice poses on there. So let's look at the Pose Maniacs. I think what I want to bring in is sort of a pose, like a bodybuilder pose. Let's see. I like this one. This looks like this one looks like Angel from One Punch Man, the really buff guy. I think this will be perfect. Okay, let's try to import this. So there's a button on the bottom left here that just opens it. We're gonna use that. Open in Clip Studio. It'll ask me to open the app. Perfect. Okay, so we've got our pose. I think this looks really cool. Now let's, I think the hand pose is perfect. Manga perspective might do a bit here. Yeah, Manga's perspective's not going to do very much in this regard. I feel like it's okay. Right now, we don't have to worry about that. The pose is already set. Shadow-wise, I think we're okay. That looks good to me. It's like a JoJo's pose, you know? It's kind of what I was going for. Let's set him to be on the ground plane again. And then, just so the shadow is correct. And then I like the idea of this, maybe where he's looking down at us. So let's get him closer to the camera. And then move the whole thing down a little bit. Right? Sort of a Dio pose. And we'll move him a little bit to the side here. Okay, I think I've got the character in the perfect pose. I got some nice lighting. I think I've got a decent enough position on the canvas. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to draw this character out. I'm going to draw 2 more in the default model pose and or the default model stage where they don't have any changes made to the size. And yeah, I'm going to time lapse them so you guys get to see that. So hopefully you enjoyed this section of the video, the tutorial part. Now let's get into some drawing. Okay, well guys, here are the final drawings. I think they came out pretty well. I like the posing that came out. You can see in the videos that I had to do a bit of, you know, working around some of the anatomy of the models, but otherwise the posing I really think is super helpful. The musculature was pretty accurate for most of them, so yeah. I hope you guys are able to use this video to get some more work out of your characters, to have a little bit more of an ease in your character design, and hopefully save some of your designs so you can use them in the future for multiple poses. If you did like this video, please make sure to subscribe. I really want to make more of these, and it's super helpful to see when people are liking the videos. Also, if you have any thoughts on the next video you want to see, please make sure to leave a comment on this video. Thanks for watching the tutorial. This has been Spencer from Start Manga, and I'll see you later.